Okay, let's unpack this. A truly surprising breach has reportedly occurred within the U.S. government, and at the center of it, something many of us use daily, the messaging app Signal.
Yeah, Signal. And we're talking sensitive military planning, high-ranking officials involved, and, well, how this simple app ended up causing a major stir.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how the sort of convenience and maybe the perceived security of these digital tools,
How they intersect or sometimes really clash with the kind of strict protocols you'd expect for national security.
exactly. This whole Signalgate thing, it really seems to shine a light on those potential cracks.
Right, where the modern way of doing things meets, the old school security needs.
So for this deep dive, you shared a great range of sources. We've got detailed news reports, some analysis from Harvard, even a Reddit thread, which gives us some on-the-ground reactions too.
Yeah, trying to get a few different angles on it.
Our mission here is really to cut through the noise, go beyond just the headlines, and understand, what actually happened. Why is it such a big deal, and what could the consequences be down the line?
And if you think about the bigger picture, this whole situation points to a growing challenge, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, how governments can actually use the speed and, let's face it, the efficiency of these modern digital tools.
Right, because they are efficient.
While still keeping up the absolute highest standards for information security and, crucially, operational security, protecting sensitive info during actual operations.
Okay, so let's get into the how. How did this whole thing start? It seems the focus is this Signal group chat created back in March 2025.
And the title was pretty direct, wasn't it? Houthi PC Small Group.
Yeah, doesn't leave much to the imagination.
No. That title alone, it suggests a really focused, probably time-sensitive discussion. Not just, casual back and forth.
Yeah.
It points to a specific operational thing.
Right. And this wasn't just some mid-level staffers talking. The reported members, they were big names.
Oh, absolutely. You're talking National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth.
Vice President JD Vance was in there?
Yep, JD Vance, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Others, too, a very senior group.
Wow. The fact that those individuals were involved just underlines how sensitive the discussion must have been.
Absolutely. Any leak, any compromise at that level, it carries potentially huge ramifications.
And here's where it gets, well, almost unbelievable. The leak itself. Apparently it happened because National Security Advisor Mike Waltz mistakenly added someone to the chat.
Yeah, Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic.
How does that even happen?
The story goes, Waltz had saved Goldberg's number under a different contact name. Just a simple mistake.
An accidental invite to a top-secret planning session, basically. Incredible.
It really highlights the human element, doesn't it, in all this cybersecurity talk. Even with encrypted platforms, end-to-end encryption. A simple user error can just blow a huge hole in it. It's a good reminder that the tech itself isn't like a magic shield.
So what were they actually discussing in this Houthi PC small group? What was so urgent?
Well, the main point seems to have been coordinating policies, specifically around imminent U.S. military strikes against Houthi positions in Yemen.
Okay, so active military planning.
Exactly, which makes the security of their comms absolutely critical.
And the details shared. They weren't vague, were they?
Not according to the reports. We're talking specific information about the airstrikes, things like...
Like what? Targets.
Targets, yeah. The
Okay.
types of weapons they plan to use, even, reportedly, the exact launch and attack times.
Wow. Sharing that level of operational detail on Signal, that sounds like a huge red flag.
It immediately raises massive operational security, or OPSEC, concerns, discussing targets, timelines, weapon specifics outside properly secured, approved channels. That just ramps up the risk of it falling into the wrong hands, exponentially.
And it didn't stop there, apparently. It gets even more concerning.
How so?
Reports say that CIA Director John Ratcliffe, he actually mentioned the name of an active undercover CIA officer in the chat.
Oof. That is, yeah. That's a profoundly serious disclosure.
Right.
Revealing an undercover officer's identity like that, it could put that officer in direct danger, obviously. It jeopardizes their safety, their operations, everything. It really shows the potential for real-world harm from these kinds of, digital slip-ups. It's not just about leaked plans.
And beyond the sort of tactical strike details, it seems some personal opinions got aired too. Vice President Vance and Secretary Hegseth apparently shared some pretty critical views about European allies.
Yeah, that was reported too. And those kinds of comments, especially coming from officials at that level, they can really strain diplomatic ties.
Undermine trust, maybe?
Definitely impact international cooperation. It sort of reveals a potential gap between the official diplomatic line and, well, what's being said privately.
There was also apparently some disagreement within the chat about the timing of the strikes.
That's right. Concerns were raised about the potential economic impact and also how the timing might look, given whatever the administration was saying publicly about Europe at the time.
So you've got this mix of military strategy, economic worries, diplomatic angles, all being hashed out on Signal.
It really paints a picture of that complex web of factors and high-level decisions, and all happening on this platform.
And just when you think it couldn't get more complicated, Secretary Hegseth, the defense secretary, he reportedly shared details about the Yemen strikes in a second Signal chat.
A second one? Who was in that?
This one apparently included his wife, his brother, and his lawyer.
Wow. Okay, so that just widens the circle even further. More people with access to sensitive information.
Increases the risk again.
Definitely increases the potential leak surface area. And it raises serious questions about sticking to security protocols, the whole need-to-know principle.
Unsurprisingly, when this all came out, the reaction was pretty swift and pretty strong.
You'd expect that.
National security experts were quick to weigh in. Matthew Bunn from Harvard Kennedy School, he reportedly called it appalling.
Strong word.
Yeah. And he apparently stressed the serious damage something like this could do to international trust, to intelligence sharing relationships.
And Bunn's perspective, coming from someone who really understands how government and security work, it just underlines that potential damage. These international partnerships, they rely so heavily on trust, on knowing sensitive information will be handled securely.
And almost inevitably, people started making comparisons to past controversies.
Like the Hillary Clinton email server situation.
Exactly. That came up a lot.
Yeah.
And some observers were quick to point out that, well, some of the very people involved in this situation had reacted quite differently back then.
Yeah, those comparisons definitely highlight the political dimension, don't they? Security breaches involving officials often get tangled up in politics.
And perceptions of hypocrisy, whether fair or not, can just erode public trust even more, fuel the partisan arguments. Interestingly, the Pentagon itself, they reportedly put out an internal memo, but only after the leak was already public knowledge.
Ah, the timing.
Right. Reminding employees that third-party messaging apps like Signal, they're not actually approved for processing or storing non-public, unclassified information.
So basically a formal reminder of a policy that was likely already in place.
Seems that way. Like maybe a reminder was suddenly felt necessary.
That memo itself suggests that, look, while these apps might be convenient, quick, they just don't meet the security standards the government requires for official communications. Even if the information isn't technically classified, it kind of implies the existing guidelines might have been, well, ignored.
So let's talk about Signal for a second. It has a good reputation, right, for end-to-end encryption.
It does, generally. End-to-end encryption basically means the message is scrambled on the sender's phone and only unscrambled on the recipient's phone. Nobody in the middle, not even Signal itself, can easily read it.
Okay, sounds good. But there were warnings. The NSA had apparently raised some concerns even before this whole thing happened.
Yeah, prior warnings reportedly existed, particularly about things like phishing scams.
Okay, like tricking users into giving up info.
Exactly. Deceptive emails or messages trying to get login details or install malware. And also risks linked to using Signal on desktop computers, linking the app on your phone to an app on your computer.
Why is that a risk?
Well, while the Signal message itself is encrypted in transit, the weak points are often the devices themselves, the endpoints. Phishing can compromise a user's account, and if your desktop computer isn't as secure as your phone, linking the app could potentially create another way in for attackers.
So the NSA's warnings were basically saying, hey, even with encryption, you got to be careful how you use it.
Pretty much. Vigilance is key. The encryption protects the pipe, but you need to protect the ends of the pipe too.
And then, of course, there was the inevitable Reddit discussion.
Reddit always has an opinion.
Opinions were definitely vary, as you'd expect. But some users were debating the legality of using Signal for this kind of stuff.
Right.
They were bringing up potential violations of laws like 18 U.S.C. 793. which deals with handling national defense information improperly
Yeah.
and also federal record-keeping rules.
Yeah, the legal side is tricky. It often depends on the exact nature of the information shared. Was it truly national defense information under the law? What was the intent?
Right.
Like some Reddit users probably pointed out, laws like 793 have specific definitions. And how you apply them to this kind of situation, especially with unclassified but sensitive info, can be debated.
But other users on there were pushing back, right, saying, hey, maybe no specific law was actually broken, that the info wasn't technically classified or maybe not ultimately harmful in a provable way.
Exactly. So there wasn't really a clear consensus, at least not in that public discussion.
It just shows how complex the legal framework is when you're talking about sensitive government info, maybe not classified, but still sensitive on these modern digital platforms.
It's a gray area, legally speaking, in many ways.
So what happened next? What was the actual fallout from this Signalgate? There were consequences, right? People lost their jobs.
Oh, yeah. Some significant personnel changes happened pretty quickly. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, the one who reportedly added the journalist he was out.
Gone. Okay.
And his deputy, Alex Wong, also left his post.
Both of them? And there were reports that a conservative activist, Laura Loomer, had kind of pushed for them to go, citing loyalty concerns.
That was reported, yes. It suggests the decision wasn't just about the leak itself, but maybe some internal political dynamics were at play, too. Loomer's reported involvement certainly adds that layer.
Interesting. Meanwhile, some Democrats were arguing that Secretary of Defense Hegseth, maybe he should have faced more accountability.
Yeah, there were calls for that.
Why him specifically? Because of the second chat?
Likely, yeah. Given the reports that he shared sensitive information not just in the main chat, but also in that second chat with his wife, brother, and lawyer, the argument was that this showed maybe a broader pattern of disregarding security rules, sharing sensitive stuff on unapproved platforms with a wider group than necessary.
And it didn't just stop with people leaving their jobs. There was legal action, too.
That's right. American Oversight, which is a government watchdog group, they actually filed a lawsuit.
Against who?
Against Hegseth and other officials involved, alleging violations of the Federal Records Act.
What does that mean, the Federal Records Act?
It basically requires government officials to preserve records related to their official duties. The argument was that these signal communications counted as official records and should have been saved, not potentially deleted.
And they got a court order.
Yeah, a temporary restraining order was issued, basically telling them to preserve those signal messages, likely as potential evidence for the lawsuit.
So external groups trying to force some transparency and make sure records weren't just disappearing.
Exactly. Using legal channels to push for accountability and adherence to record-keeping laws, even for digital messages.
Was there also an internal investigation at the Pentagon?
Yes, reportedly. Looking into unauthorized disclosures generally, but including this signal leak specifically.
And did that lead anywhere?
Reports suggest it did. It apparently led to the suspension of the Pentagon Deputy Chief of Staff, Darren Selnick, and also a senior advisor to Hegseth named Dan Caldwell.
Suspended. Okay, so the Pentagon was taking some internal action as well.
It seems so. Trying to figure out the full scope of who shared what and if protocols were broken.
And the sort of drip of revelations continued, didn't it? More details kept coming out.
Yeah, like that report from a German magazine.
What was that?
They apparently found private contact details, maybe even passwords, of some officials involved in the chat just out there online, publicly accessible.
Seriously, how does that happen?
Details are murky, but it points to broader potential security lapses, maybe beyond just the Signal app use.
And there was other stuff too, right? Like Waltz's Venmo account being public.
Yeah. Reportedly showing connections with other officials. And also reports that Hegseth had brought his wife to meetings with foreign military officials.
Which raises questions about who should be in those kinds of sensitive meetings.
Exactly. It paints a picture of potentially lax security practices, maybe a lack of awareness or judgment about operational security that went beyond just using Signal.
And wasn't there something about using personal email, too?
Right. Reports surfaced that NSC staff, including Waltz again, were sometimes using personal Gmail accounts for government business.
Which is another big no-no. Usually.
Definitely. Using personal email bypasses official security, bypasses record-keeping systems, creates more vulnerabilities, less transparency. It adds to that overall picture.
So with all this swirling around,
Yeah.
What was the reaction from the top? From then President Trump?
Publicly, his statements seemed to kind of downplay it. He called the criticism unfair, suggested it was just something that can happen.
But privately.
Reports suggested he was actually pretty upset about the whole thing, so maybe a difference between the public message and the private reaction.
And the White House initially said the case was closed.
That was an early statement, yeah, which seemed maybe premature given everything still unfolding.
And then Elon Musk got involved, offering tech help.
Yeah, kind of an unusual twist. He reportedly offered to send technical experts to help figure out exactly how Goldberg, the journalist, got added to the chat.
Strange. Okay, what about internationally? How did U.S. allies react to all this?
Not well. Reports indicated allies in Europe and also Israel were pretty concerned, alarmed even.
By the leak itself, or?
Both the security breach itself, yeah, but also apparently those negative comments about European allies that were reportedly in the chat. That didn't help matters.
Doubly damaging, then.
You could say that. And Canada even put out a statement basically warning that they might need to become more self-reliant on defense matters.
Suggesting maybe they couldn't fully trust U.S. security or intentions after this?
It certainly implies a dent in confidence. These allies rely on secure information sharing, and incidents like this shake that foundation. The negative comments just amplify the concern.
And back home, Congress got involved too.
Yes, definitely. Hearings were held by both the Senate and House Intelligence Committees.
To do what? Grill officials.
Pretty much. To discuss the leak, understand what happened, what the implications were. Congressional oversight is a key part of the accountability process in these situations. It's a chance to examine potential systemic weaknesses and think about maybe new rules or laws.
And were there specific calls for action from Congress members?
Yeah, Senator Mark Kelly, for instance, publicly called for Secretary Hegseth to resign.
Okay, so direct calls for resignation.
And Senator Murkowski made a pointed comment basically saying, imagine the reaction if something like this had happened under a different administration.
Highlighting the political angle again.
Right. Suggesting maybe a double standard in how these things are treated depending on who's in charge. It underscores those partisan dimensions that often surround these kinds of events.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around the key takeaways here. We had sensitive military plans.
Yeah, details about strikes, targets, timing.
Being discussed on a messaging app, Signal, which wasn't approved for that kind of information.
Right. Then a journalist gets accidentally added to the chat.
Which blows the whole thing wide open. And the result is this cascade of consequences.
Firings, resignations, lawsuits, internal investigations.
Within the Trump administration. And it raises really serious questions about their security protocols, about accountability at the very top levels.
Absolutely. This whole Signalgate episode, it really serves as a stark reminder, I think, a case study in the ongoing struggle.
The struggle between what?
Between balancing the speed and the undeniable convenience of modern digital communication.
Which everyone wants to use.
With the absolute necessity of maintaining ironclad security when you're dealing with sensitive government operations.
And that leads us, I guess, to the final thought we want to leave you, the listener, with. What does this incident really tell us about that shifting balance between how we communicate informally now, digitally, and the demands of national security in this super interconnected world?
And maybe what are the longer-term effects on trust, both here at home and with our allies, on how willing countries or agencies will be to share sensitive information in the future?
It really forces you to think critically, doesn't it, about how governments need to adapt their security practices for today's tech.
While still making sure information can flow quickly and efficiently when it needs to. It's a tough balancing act.
Definitely a lot to mull over there. We really encourage you to maybe look into some of the different news reports and perspectives we touched on in this deep dive, see the different angles, and draw your own informed conclusions about this ongoing story.